The sun was already high by the time Marcus Hayes stepped out onto his front lawn with a rake in one hand and a mug of coffee in the other. It was the kind of late July morning in Plano, Texas, that made the sidewalks shimmer, the kind that reminded everyone that summer still had some fire left in it. He took a sip from the mug and glanced at his yard, which, if he were honest, looked pretty damn good. Grass, evenly trimmed edges, clean the shrubs out front, had been shaped 2 days ago. It wasn't perfect, but it was far from what he'd call a violation. Still, as his eyes wandered toward the edge of his property, his gaze locked on a crisp white envelope taped to his mailbox. He let out a soft sigh and walked over. Sure enough, it was another notice from the Maple Ridge Estates HOA. Lawn maintenance infraction. Area near driveway exceeds length standard. He stared at the envelope for a second, then looked back at the grass. It was no more than 2 inches tall. Maybe 2.5 if you counted the patch by the fire hydrant. Across the street, Frank Dobbins had a front yard that looked like a hayfield compared to this. Marcus shook his head. "Here we go again," he muttered under his breath. As if summoned by the thought, the familiar sound of sensible heels tapping on pavement approached. Janice Whitmore, president of the HOA for the last 7 years, and self-proclaimed guardian of neighborhood order, was making her rounds. Dressed in her usual beige slacks and starched polo clipboard in hand, she stopped in front of his lawn like a judge arriving at the scene of a crime. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," she said with a clipped smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Morning," Marcus replied evenly, lifting his mug in polite acknowledgement. "I noticed the grass along your driveway hasn't been addressed. This is your 3rd warning." Marcus gestured calmly to the lawn. "It's shorter than most lots on the block, including yours." Janice's smile twitched. "We have standards, Mr. Hayes. The community bylaws clearly state—" "I've read the bylaws, Ms. Whitmore," he interrupted gently. "Twice." Her nostrils flared slightly, but she maintained her posture. "Then you should understand that uniformity is key to preserving property values. We can't make exceptions." Marcus nodded slowly. "So I'm the exception now." She blinked. "Pardon? I've lived here 2 years. Haven't missed a payment. Haven't played loud music. Don't leave trash out. But I've gotten more notices than Frank, who leaves his boat trailer out 3 weeks at a time." Janice's lips pressed together in a thin line. "It's not about you. It's about the integrity of the neighborhood." He took another sip of coffee. "Right." From across the street, Evelyn Carter pulled into her driveway. She glanced toward them, hesitated, then gave Marcus a small wave. He returned it without smiling. Janice followed his gaze, then turned back to him. "Just take care of it," she said softer now, almost patronizing. "No one likes troublemakers." With that, she clicked her pen and walked off down the sidewalk, stopping at the next house to peer into a flower bed. Marcus stood there a moment longer, watching her move from house to house like a human measuring tape. Then he walked back inside. Danielle was at the kitchen sink peeling a mango for the kids' lunch. She didn't have to ask, she could read the tension in his shoulders. "Another one?" she asked. "Yard's too green this time." She shook her head. "Janice again." He nodded, dropping the notice on the table. Danielle sighed. "You know, she never looked twice at this house until we bought it." Marcus leaned on the counter. "Yeah, and now she looks 3 times a day." She placed the sliced mango into a bowl and leaned toward him. "You sure you want to let this go?" "Again?" He met her eyes. "Not forever. Just not like this. Not on her terms." She nodded slowly, respecting the calm in him, even when she wanted to scream. That was always Marcus's way. Controlled, deliberate, measured. Out front, a delivery truck rumbled past. Somewhere a dog barked. Life continued in the neighborhood as it always did. Quiet, neat, tightly wound. But under the surface, something had shifted. That evening, as Marcus swept the porch, Frank walked by with his usual slow gait, soda can in hand. He paused at the edge of Marcus's yard. "Looks good," Frank said, nodding toward the grass. "Appreciate it," Marcus replied. Frank hesitated. "Janice, leave you another one of those fancy threats." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You get those too," Frank chuckled dryly. "Not since my wife baked her a lemon pie last Christmas. Guess that earned us immunity." Marcus gave a wry smile. "Maybe I'll try cookies." Frank leaned in slightly. Between you and me, she's got it in for folks who don't fit the look. You know what I mean." Marcus said nothing, but the flicker in his eyes said everything. Frank gave a slow nod and walked on. "Just keep your head up, son." Inside, Danielle was getting the kids ready for bed. Marcus stood on the porch a few moments longer, eyes scanning the quiet cul-de-sac. The streetlights flickered on one by one. A cat darted across the road. Somewhere a sprinkler hissed to life. He didn't know exactly when Janice decided he was the problem. Maybe it was the day they moved in with their Texas license plates and darker skin. Maybe it was the truck or the military flags in the garage or the sound of jazz floating from the windows on Sunday afternoons. Maybe it was just the fact that he didn't smile back when she smiled first. But he knew it wasn't about grass. Later that night, after the kids were tucked in, Marcus sat in his garage with a cold bottle of water staring at the wall. The notice lay on the workbench next to a small screwdriver and a socket wrench. Danielle came in, leaned on the doorway. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded, just thinking. She walked over and took his hand. "You're a good man. Don't let her change how you walk through this world." "I won't," he said quietly. "But I'm starting to think she's not going to stop." Danielle squeezed his hand. "Then maybe it's time we stop pretending it's about the grass." Outside, the Texas heat had finally started to break. A warm breeze drifted in through the open garage door, and down the street, parked near the edge of the neighborhood, a black SUV idled quietly. Inside, 3 men sat watching Marcus's house. Waiting. Saturday mornings in Maple Ridge Estates usually meant lawnmowers, sprinklers, and the occasional smell of bacon drifting from open windows. Marcus Hayes was in his garage by 8:30, toolbox open, planning to rewire the motion sensor above his driveway light. It was the kind of minor fix he enjoyed, hands-on, productive, solitary. He had just pulled out a flathead screwdriver when he heard footsteps. Not the casual flip-flop kind, but heavier, deliberate, military heavy. He knew the sound before he even turned around. 3 men stood in his driveway. They wore black tactical vests with bold white lettering that read "Community Enforcement." No department name, no badge number, no insignia that meant anything real. Marcus didn't move. He simply placed the screwdriver on the workbench, took a breath, and stepped to the edge of the garage. The tallest one standing center was clean-shaven and trying to look official. To his left, a bearded man shifted from foot to foot. The third looked barely old enough to rent a car. All 3 wore mirrored sunglasses. All 3 tried too hard. "Sir," the tall one called out, "we're going to need you to step away from the property." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "This is my property." "There's been a complaint," the bearded one added, voice strained. "Violation of HOA regulations." Marcus tilted his head. "Which regulation?" The young one opened his mouth, then closed it. The bearded one cleared his throat. "Unauthorized exterior modification." Marcus's lips twitched. "You mean fixing a light fixture?" Behind the trio, a 4th figure appeared. Janice Whitmore, arms crossed, lips pursed, standing at the edge of the sidewalk like a queen surveying a battlefield. "There he is," she said, loudly stepping forward. "That's the one. He's been warned." Marcus didn't flinch. Warned about what Janice pointed at him, as if that answered everything. "This kind of rogue behavior won't be tolerated." He crossed his arms. "I'm repairing a motion sensor." Janice gave a little laugh. "Without submitting the proper forms, without approval, you think the rules don't apply to you?" One of the men stepped forward. "Sir, we'll need you to come with us." Marcus didn't move. "Are you real officers?" Silence. "I'll ask again," Marcus said calmly. "Which agency are you with?" "We're authorized by the HOA," the tall one began. "Authorization doesn't equal jurisdiction." Marcus cut in, voice flat. "Are you law enforcement?" Again, no answer. Just an awkward shifting of boots on concrete. Across the street, Evelyn Carter had appeared on her porch phone in hand. Frank Dobbins peeked from behind his screen door. People were watching. Marcus could feel the weight of their stares. Janice's voice rose. "This is what happens when someone thinks they're above the community, above the rules." The young man touched the grip of what looked like a firearm strapped to his vest. Marcus saw the molded plastic, the unscuffed body, the obvious toy. He exhaled slowly, took 1 step forward. "Let me explain something to you," he said, addressing all three. "Real officers don't carry prop weapons. Real officers don't hesitate when you ask for their department. And real officers don't enforce bylaws with threats." The bearded one stiffened. "Sir, we've been instructed to do what Marcus asked. Illegally detain a homeowner." "You realize impersonating law enforcement is a felony, right?" Janice snapped. "Don't intimidate them. Just cuff him." The young one fumbled in his vest and pulled out a pair of shiny metal handcuffs, more costume than restraint. A murmur rippled through the growing group of neighbors. Marcus didn't laugh, but the smirk that touched his face said everything. "You're going to cuff me with toy restraints?" he asked, stepping into the sunlight. "You better think long and hard before you make the dumbest mistake of your life." Evelyn raised her voice from across the street. "Those men aren't real cops. I worked with actual deputies for 10 years. That's not standard issue." Another neighbor, James O'Malley, had appeared near his mailbox. "What's going on here?" he asked loudly. Janice turned annoyed. "This is an internal matter. HOA business." James folded his arms. "Looks like harassment to me." The three men shifted again. Their confidence was breaking apart like paper in a storm. The tallest one cleared his throat. "We were told the man was hostile." Marcus's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Hostile fixing a light in my garage? Or is it hostile because of what I look like?" Janice's face flushed red. "Don't you dare make this about race." He stepped closer. "What's it about then? Because no one else on this street has had warnings for grass height, mailbox paint, or fixing things in daylight." Evelyn spoke again, firmer now. "He's right. No one's ever enforced those things until he moved in." A soft murmur of agreement moved through the small crowd. Janice, losing grip, barked, "Cuff him now, or I'll handle it myself." The bearded man looked panicked. The young one took a step back. The tall one opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Marcus's voice turned sharp. "You impersonated police, brought fake weapons into a family neighborhood, and tried to arrest someone without cause. You're lucky I'm calmer than most." More people were recording now. Some had stepped onto the sidewalks, murmuring among themselves. The air felt heavier by the second. Janice tried again. "You think this little performance means anything. This won't end the way you think." He looked at her, then at the three men. "You have 3 options. 1, admit what you're doing and walk away. 2, push forward and get arrested for real. Or 3, wait for the sheriff to arrive and explain yourself to them." The tall man finally said, "We didn't know." "She just said," Marcus raised a hand. "That's enough." He turned, slightly scanning the crowd. Frank had stepped outside now, arms crossed. "Let me be clear," Marcus said. "This isn't about rules, it's about control. And the only thing I've done wrong today is not backing down when someone tried to bully me." The young man dropped his cuffs. The bearded one rubbed his temple, visibly sweating. The tall one whispered something under his breath. And then sirens. Far off at first, then closer. Blue and red lights flashed at the end of the street. A pair of sheriff's deputies rolled in slowly, eyes scanning the crowd. Janice blanched. Oh no. Marcus didn't move. He stood firm, arms loose at his sides. The 3 men stood frozen, toy weapons still strapped to their vests. The real authorities had arrived, and the reckoning was only beginning. By the time the sheriff cruisers rolled onto Cedar Drive, the morning had turned into a scene straight out of a courtroom drama. Neighbors stood clustered along sidewalks and driveways, phones raised, lips tight. The sun glared overhead, but no one moved. They were witnessing something that had been brewing for far too long. Marcus Hayes stood in the center of his driveway toolbox, forgotten sleeves rolled up, arms relaxed but coiled ready-steady. In front of him, the 3 so-called community enforcement men stood like schoolboys caught cheating on a test, their fake weapons still strapped to their chests, sweat trickling down their faces. Janice Whitmore hovered behind them like a furious shadow, her once flawless posture now slightly hunched, her voice gone shrill from shouting into the void. Deputy Carl Benson stepped out of the lead cruiser, his presence calm but commanding. He was broad-shouldered, his tan uniform crisp, and his right hand rested casually but deliberately near his belt. His partner, Deputy Brian Lee, followed close behind, eyes scanning the crowd before settling on the 3 imposters. "What's going on here?" Benson asked, his voice clear, even. Janice jumped in before anyone else could speak. "Officers, thank God! This man, Marcus Hayes, has been refusing to comply with HOA regulations. These men were assisting the board. He threatened them." Benson didn't respond immediately. His eyes went to Marcus. Sir Marcus's voice was calm. These men showed up in tactical vests, tried to detain me. Claimed they had authority through the HOA. Their weapons are fake. Their IDs are questionable. They are not law enforcement. Lee approached the imposters, holding out a hand. Badges. The bearded man fumbled with his wallet and pulled out a laminated card. Lee took one look at it and let out a dry chuckle. Community Enforcement Division, he read aloud. You get this off Etsy or Craigslist. No answer. Benson motioned with his hand. Weapons on the ground. Now. The three men hesitated, then slowly removed the replica guns and laid them down. Benson picked one up, turned it over in his hand, and muttered, "Plastic." He turned back to Janice. "Ma'am, did you authorize this?" She stiffened. "They were helping enforce community standards. The HOA allows us—" No, Benson interrupted. HOAs can issue letters, maybe fines. They don't get to stage arrests or hire guys dressed like action figures. This is impersonating law enforcement. Evelyn Carter stepped forward, holding up her phone. "I've got the whole thing on video. They tried to cuff him with novelty restraints. She ordered them to do it." Lee nodded. "We'll need that." The tallest of the fake officers looked like he was about to be sick. "We didn't know it was a crime." She told us Janice spun on him. "Don't you dare blame me. You said you had training. You said this was legal," the man shot back. Marcus stepped slightly forward. "Deputy, with your permission?" Benson gave a short nod. Marcus turned to face Janice, his voice low and even. "You brought 3 men to my home. Men with fake weapons, fake authority. In front of my children's windows. Because you didn't like the way I fixed a light." Janice's voice cracked. "You've been bending the rules since you moved in." "What rules?" Marcus asked. "The ones no one else has written up for." James O'Malley raised his hand from the crowd. "She fined me for leaving up Christmas lights until January 3rd. Meanwhile, her friend parked a trailer out front for a month. Frank Dobbins added, "My grandson got yelled at for riding his bike in the cul-de-sac. Said it violated safety protocol." More voices chimed in now. The floodgates had opened. People weren't afraid anymore. Janice turned in a slow circle, looking at all of them. "You're letting him manipulate you." "No," Evelyn said firmly. "We're finally seeing clearly." Lee turned toward Janice. "Ma'am, you're coming with us for questioning. We need to understand your role in this." Janice's face turned blotchy. "You can't do this. I'm the HOA president." Benson didn't flinch. "And you may have broken several laws. Your title doesn't give you immunity." He motioned to one of the cruisers. "Let's go." As they led her away, Janice twisted to look back at Marcus. "You think you've won?" He didn't respond. Instead, he turned to the 3 men still standing in his driveway. "You still want to pretend, or are we done here?" The youngest one looked like he might cry. The bearded man shook his head slowly. "We're done," Benson gestured. "Hands behind your backs. You're under arrest for impersonating law enforcement, attempted unlawful detainment, and brandishing replica weapons in a threatening manner." The sound of real handcuffs clicking echoed through the stillness. Frank muttered under his breath. That man just turned the tables without even raising his voice. Danielle appeared beside Marcus, then having kept the kids inside. She slipped her hand into his, gave it a light squeeze. "You all right?" she asked. He nodded. "I'm good." She glanced at the crowd. "They saw it, Marcus. All of it. There's no going back now." Across the street, Evelyn approached, still holding her phone. "Everything's on here," she said, "from the moment they walked up." Marcus gave her a nod of appreciation. "Thank you." She hesitated. "I should have said something sooner. She's been like this for years. I didn't have the guts." "You had it today," Marcus said. "That's what matters." The crowd began to disperse slowly like fog lifting. People shook his hand, clapped his back, gave him solemn nods of respect. For some, it was apology. For others, recognition. As the deputies loaded Janice and the 3 men into cruisers, the red and blue lights painted every house in flashes of consequence. James approached, folding his arms. "You handled that better than anyone I've ever seen. Could have gone real bad." Marcus looked toward the empty space where Janice had stood just minutes ago. "It still might," Frank added. "But now people know. That counts for something." Danielle leaned in. "It's finally out in the open." Marcus exhaled deeply. Yeah, but exposure's just the first step. What we do next, that's what matters. The last cruiser pulled away. Silence settled over Cedar Drive, heavy but cleansing. And somewhere deep in Marcus's chest, a knot loosened, but he knew better than to believe the story was over. The next morning, Cedar Drive looked almost the same as always, trimmed lawns, swaying trees, the occasional dog barking down the block. But underneath the familiar quiet was something new, something raw. The air was heavier. The stillness wasn't peace. It was the echo of everything that had just happened. Marcus Hayes stood in his garage, finally fixing the light fixture that had sparked the chaos just 24 hours earlier. His hands moved with quiet precision, but his mind wasn't on the wires. It was on the sirens, the uniforms, the way Janice had screamed as she was led to the cruiser like a dethroned monarch. Across the street, neighbors who once barely waved now slowed their walks, made eye contact. Some stopped to speak. Others offered him something more subtle, a nod, a look of quiet acknowledgement, the kind you give someone who just said what everyone else was too afraid to. By midday, a familiar voice returned Deputy Brian Lee stepping out of his cruiser with a manila folder tucked under one arm. "Morning, Mr. Hayes," he said. "Morning, Deputy. Mind if I give you an update?" Marcus wiped his hands on a rag. "Sure." Lee opened the folder. All 3 men are in custody, 2 are cooperating. They claim Janice promised them cash for community enforcement, told them what to say, even gave them those fake IDs. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "And the 3rd, the bearded one, the loud one he's holding out, still says they were just helping maintain order. But between the videos and the toy weapons, his story's not holding." Marcus nodded once, and Janice Lee hesitated. "She's not under formal arrest yet, but the state attorney's office is reviewing the whole case, potential charges for conspiracy, misuse of authority, and endangering public safety." Just then, Evelyn Carter walked up the driveway holding a folder of her own. "I brought these," she said, handing Lee a stack of printed screenshots and timestamps. Everything from the moment they arrived to the second you cuffed them. Lee accepted it gratefully. "This helps. A lot." When he left, Evelyn lingered, looking at Marcus. "I should have said something sooner," she admitted. "We all should have. She's been awful for years. We were scared to speak up." Marcus looked her in the eye. "Then don't stay quiet anymore." She nodded, her voice soft. "You didn't just stand up for you. You stood up for all of us." That evening, something unexpected happened. Tom Wilkins brought over a folding chair and a cooler of root beer. Then came Carla Jensen with lemonade. Robert Klein and his wife followed with 2 more chairs and paper plates. They didn't say it out loud, but everyone knew what it was. Not a party. A reckoning. People sat in Marcus's yard talking for the first time in years, not about lawns or HOA rules, but about what they'd endured. "She fined me for hanging my wreath too early in November," Carla said. Meanwhile, her friend had Halloween decorations up until December. "She told me my mailbox was too modern," Robert's wife added. "What does that even mean?" Laughter followed, not cheerful, but necessary. Cathartic. Danielle brought out lemonade. The kids ran around barefoot on the grass, giggling like nothing had ever happened. Marcus sat quietly, taking it all in. The murmurs, the shared stories, the subtle shift in power. Later that week, an emergency HOA board meeting was announced. Normally, such gatherings drew a sparse 5 to 6 people, those with too much time or too many complaints. This time, nearly the entire neighborhood showed up. They filled the community center room, folding chairs packed tight. People stood along the walls. Some still had their work uniforms on. Others came straight from errands. But all of them came. Without Janice presiding, she had been suspended pending investigation. There was an awkward silence at first. Then Tom Wilkins stood up. "I've lived here 22 years, he said, "and I've never seen what I saw last week. We were all afraid to speak, afraid of letters, of fines, of being targeted. But now we know better." Carla stood next. Janice didn't enforce the rules. She twisted them, bent them into weapons. More hands went up. More stories spilled out. One by one, people unburdened themselves about double standards, hidden agendas, the feeling that they didn't belong. Marcus didn't speak for most of it. He sat quietly, arms folded, just listening. By the end, the board voted to formally remove Janice as HOA president. It wasn't just a vote about her, it was a message. Abuse, no matter how small the stage, would no longer be tolerated. When Marcus stepped outside after the meeting, someone clapped him on the back. Another shook his hand. A few just gave him a look they hadn't given him since he moved in trust. He didn't smile, he didn't gloat. He wasn't here for that. What he was here for, what mattered most, was that people had finally woken up. But Marcus knew better than most that stories like these never ended cleanly. Power never surrendered without a fight. And even when the masks fall off, some folks still try to claw them back on. The chaos had faded, but the echoes remained. A week after Janice Whitmore was removed, as HOA president, Cedar Drive looked almost too normal. Lawns were still trimmed. Cars still rolled slowly past at exactly 25 miles per hour. But beneath that suburban calm, something had shifted like a current beneath still water. Marcus Hayes noticed it every time he stepped outside. There was more eye contact now, more greetings. Neighbors who once avoided his gaze now waved, smiled, even stopped to chat. "Morning, Mr. Hayes." Someone called from across the street. A woman he only knew as Alex lived 2 doors down, worked night shifts at the hospital. "Morning," he called back, tipping his head. She added, "Light fixture holding up." He chuckled. Better than expected. That small exchange, casual, neighborly, felt more meaningful than any letter from the HOA. Later that afternoon, Marcus found himself on the porch again, a cold glass of tea in hand. The sun was softening, casting long shadows down Cedar Drive. Danielle sat beside him, legs tucked under her, the kids playing with chalk near the steps. For a while, they just watched in silence. Then she spoke. "You've been quiet." He nodded. "Been thinking. About how close it came," he said. "How bad it could have gone. 3 fake cops' nerves on edge. If one of them had twitched wrong, if I had—" She touched his arm. "But you didn't. You kept it from becoming something worse." Marcus exhaled through his nose. "That's what the Navy taught me. Control. Not just of the situation, but of myself." He looked at his kids laughing, drawing stars and rockets on the driveway. "That's what scares me most," he added. "Most people don't get that training. Most people react. And that's how tragedies happen." Danielle leaned her head on his shoulder. "You didn't just protect our family. You protected this whole block." He didn't respond, but the look in his eyes said he heard her. That evening, Evelyn Carter knocked on the door. She had a petition in hand, one started by several neighbors asking the board to implement oversight policies for future HOA presidents. "We've had too much power concentrated in one person for too long," she explained. "Time we built in checks and balances." Marcus read it, then signed. "You started something," she said, "and we want to make sure it doesn't fade." After she left, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, the petition still in hand. He thought about all the small ways people had been hurt over the years, fined, unfairly shamed, quietly pushed to leave. And he realized the real damage hadn't been the fake arrest attempt. That was just the explosion. The real damage had been the slow, quiet erosion of trust. Janice had worn a mask of rules, order, community standards. But underneath it was about control. And no one stopped her, not because they agreed, but because they were tired, afraid, uncertain. Marcus had simply forced the mask off. Over the next few weeks, healing began. The HOA sent out a survey asking residents to submit feedback anonymously, something they'd never done before. It was Danielle's idea, and the board, desperate to regain credibility, adopted it quickly. The results came back brutal and honest. Too much enforcement, too little transparency, too much fear, too little community. For the first time, people didn't just want to live in Cedar Drive, they wanted to belong to it. A new initiative was formed, Community Saturdays. Once a month, families would gather, rotate homes, share food swap stories. No agenda, no fines, just neighbors being neighbors. The first one was held on Marcus's lawn. Tom Wilkins brought over grilled chicken. Carla Jensen brought fresh cornbread. The Klein family brought sweet tea and extra chairs. Kids darted between adults laughing. Someone started music. People smiled, genuinely smiled. At one point, Robert Klein raised a plastic cup of lemonade. To the man who reminded us what strength really looks like. Marcus raised his eyebrows, amused. Is this a toast or an ambush? Everyone chuckled. Robert continued. You didn't yell, didn't threaten, you didn't need to. You stood firm, you held the line. More nods, more raised cups. Danielle leaned over and whispered, You're officially a neighborhood legend. Marcus groaned playfully. That's going to get me volunteered for 100 committees. Someone shouted, HOA president? Maybe? The crowd laughed harder. Marcus shook his head, smiling for real this time. I've had enough politics for a lifetime. That night, after the last guest left and the kids were in bed, Marcus sat on the porch again. Across the street, Tom waved from his own rocking chair. Carla watered her plants. The stars blinked quietly overhead. Danielle stepped outside with 2 mugs of hot tea. She handed him one, sat beside him. You okay? She asked. He nodded. Just watching. Watching what? How fast things can fall apart, and how slowly they come back together. She was quiet for a beat. Then, do you regret how it happened? He thought about it. No, he said finally. I regret that it had to happen at all. She sipped her tea. But it changed things. He nodded. Not just for us, for everyone. And it had. Because the story wasn't just about a fake arrest or a bad HOA president. It was about how people let things slide, how fear becomes routine, how silence becomes complicity, and how one moment one person standing firm can start a chain reaction. Marcus knew the neighborhood would never be perfect. People were people. Egos, opinions, disagreements, they'd always exist. But now there was something else, too. Awareness, accountability, community. He took Danielle's hand and held it quietly as the night wrapped around them. For the first time in a long time, Cedar Drive felt like home, not because of the rules, but in spite of them. The story of Cedar Drive didn't stay on Cedar Drive. Within days of Janice Whitmore's staged arrest falling apart in Marcus Hayes' driveway, the video clips began to spread. First, they landed in local Jacksonville Facebook groups, then on Reddit, then local news. Former Navy SEAL shuts down fake HOA cops. Veteran stands firm against impersonators in suburban standoff. HOA president under investigation for orchestrating armed intimidation. Every outlet added their spin, but the footage spoke for itself. There was Marcus calm and steady, facing down 3 armed imposters with nothing but his voice and presence. There was Janice shouting, unraveling, revealing herself. And there was the neighborhood first confused, then transformed. Marcus hadn't planned on going viral. But the world had other plans. Journalists called, advocacy groups emailed, talk shows asked for interviews. He turned them all down. I'm not looking to be a headline, he told Danielle. But you are one, she said gently, whether you like it or not. A week later, he received a letter in the mail from the Jacksonville chapter of the Veterans for Civil Justice. Inside was a simple message. You didn't just serve your country, you served your neighborhood. We see you, and we thank you. There was a name and number at the bottom. Marcus stared at it for a long time. 2 weeks later, he sat in a modest meeting hall downtown. Around him were other veterans, some older, some younger, all dressed plainly. They didn't look like warriors. They looked like coaches, dads, security guards, construction workers. But when Marcus stood up and shared his story, they all leaned in. Not because of the fake cops or the HOA drama, but because they understood what it meant to hold the line when no one else would. One of them, a quiet Marine named Luis, said afterward, "You didn't just stop a situation. You taught people what leadership looks like." And that's when Marcus realized something. This wasn't just about his block, or his neighbors, or Janice. It was about everywhere. Because abuse of power doesn't need a uniform or a badge. Sometimes it wears a polo shirt with an HOA logo. Sometimes it hides behind policies. Sometimes it's just someone who's always gotten away with being loudest. But it only works if people let it. That night, Marcus signed up to speak at 3 local high schools. He didn't talk about combat or his Navy days. He talked about Cedar Drive, about fake authority, about staying calm when the world tips sideways. He ended each talk the same way real strength isn't about intimidation. It's about discipline. It's about knowing you could act and choosing not to because you know what happens next. Back home, Cedar Drive continued to evolve. The HOA introduced new bylaws, this time voted on by the entire community. No more unchecked power, no more vague violations. Every letter had to be co-signed. Every complaint had to be reviewed by an impartial board. Janice's name was removed from the community newsletter. Her house eventually went up for sale. No one came to say goodbye. The man who bought it, an older black gentleman named Mr. Ramsey, moved in quietly, greeted every neighbor with a smile, and joined the community garden committee within the first week. No one sent him a violation notice. One Sunday, Marcus sat at the local park watching his kids race up and down the slides. Danielle sat beside him with a paperback in her lap, the breeze warm on their faces. A woman approached mid-30s, dressed casually, holding a notepad. "Mr. Hayes." He turned. "Yeah, I'm Jasmine Lee. I'm a reporter for the Florida Civic Times. I'm not here to ask about the HOA thing. I'm doing a piece on veterans making civic impact. Quiet kinds of service." Marcus paused, then nodded. "I don't want a spotlight," he said. "I know. That's why I want to talk to you." She sat down beside them and asked just one question. "Why didn't you lose your temper?" Marcus thought about it, then said, "Because I've seen what happens when people do." He told her about Fallujah, about waiting in the dark with teammates while people shouted threats across a wire, about holding fire until the last possible second. Because sometimes that second was the difference between surviving and regretting, and how that same discipline was exactly what saved a neighborhood. "I didn't hold back because I'm weak," he said. "I held back because I knew I could end it another way." She didn't interrupt, just took notes. When she stood to leave, she said, "Thank you. For the service, after the uniform, too." Months passed. Marcus continued speaking occasionally at schools, at community forums, even once at a city council meeting. He never rehearsed, never raised his voice, but people listened. Danielle often said he had stillness like gravity. And maybe that's what people were drawn to, not drama, not outrage, but the refusal to meet chaos with chaos. Back in Cedar Drive, things had changed for good. The community garden doubled in size. Kids played freely again without fear of violations. Neighbors brought over leftover casseroles just because. Nobody cared if someone painted their mailbox red. Control had been replaced by connection. One night, sitting around a small fire pit with Tom Carla and a few others, someone asked Marcus, "You ever think of running for something?" He laughed. "Like what city council? Hell, maybe mayor." He shook his head. "I'm not a politician." Carla grinned. "Exactly." But Marcus just smiled and sipped his drink. He didn't need a title. He'd already proven what one person could do by simply standing still when everyone else wavered. And besides, there was something more important than holding office, setting an example. Because the fight isn't always loud, it's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's a fake cop on your driveway, sometimes it's a passive comment in a meeting, sometimes it's silence when someone gets treated unfairly. And each time you have a choice. Let it slide or hold the line. Marcus chose the line. And because of that, Cedar Drive and everyone who lived on it would never be the same again. There's something about a quiet man standing still in the face of noise that lingers long after the moment passes. And on Cedar Drive, the image that remained wasn't the flashing lights or the shouting. It was Marcus Hayes, calm and unwavering on a patch of concrete he called home. Not because he raised his voice, but because he didn't need to. The scene may have started as something out of a bad neighborhood drama, fake cops, an angry HOA president, plastic weapons, but it became something else entirely. A story about what happens when a man refuses to let fear dictate the outcome. And maybe more importantly, what happens when a community finally opens its eyes to the quiet power of someone they never truly saw. At its heart, this wasn't just about Marcus. It was about dignity. About staying grounded when others try to knock you off balance, and about how sometimes the most meaningful strength comes not from pushing back, but from standing firm. The black community of Cedar Drive had known whispers, side eyes, and double standards for years. But what happened that day pulled back the curtain not just on one woman's prejudice, but on how easily a lie can gain ground when no one speaks up. Marcus didn't raise a hand. He didn't need to. His presence alone told the truth. and in doing so, he gave others the courage to find their own voice. The lesson: hold fast to your values, speak truth with calm conviction, and never underestimate the quiet force of doing what's right even when no one is watching. Like a porch light left on through the night, one steady act of integrity can guide others home. There will always be those who think they can define you by how you look, where you come from, or what you drive. But character doesn't wear a uniform. It reveals itself when things get hard. And as the Black community on Cedar Drive learned, sometimes justice walks in quietly wearing an old t-shirt and carrying a toolbox. So maybe the next time we pass someone on the street, someone who seems out of place or easy to dismiss, we'll remember this. The truth often comes wrapped in quiet, and heroes rarely announce themselves. Take a moment to sit with that. Let it settle like an old tune you didn't know you remembered. And if this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of your own neighborhood, your own unseen battles, consider passing it along. You never know who might need to hear it. Because stories like this one, well, they don't just belong to Cedar Drive. They belong to every Black community that's ever had to fight twice as hard to be seen. And sometimes the smallest front porch can hold the biggest truths.